The Last Resort. The Grand Archives of the Galactic Concordat held countless records of civilizations that had risen and fallen across millennia. Yet none of its data crystals could offer Supreme Chancellor Vexera guidance for the crisis at hand. Her crystalline fingers traced the holographic projection of Earth, a planet the Concordat had quarantined centuries ago. They were too violent, she whispered, recalling the ancient assessment. Too unpredictable. Too dangerous to join galactic society. Now, those same qualities might be their only hope. The door to her chamber hummed open as High Admiral Kyrtel entered, his normally pristine uniform showing signs of battle wear. Chancellor, the Void Collective has breached the Centauri defense line. 37 worlds lost in the last solar cycle alone. Vexera's outer membrane flickered with anxiety, sending ripples through her translucent form. And our counteroffensive failed. Their neural networks adapt to our tactics faster than we can implement them. They're perfect. The Admiral's voice carried the weight of countless defeats. Too perfect. Vexera turned back to the hologram of Earth, watching as countless data points highlighted the planet's rapid technological advancement over the past century. The quarantine beacons they'd placed in orbit had recorded everything. The development of quantum computing, the mastery of fusion power, the first tentative steps into faster-than-light travel. But more importantly, they'd recorded humanity's conflicts, their wars, their endless cycle of destruction and rebuilding. Perhaps, Vexera said slowly, we need something less than perfect. The Admiral's secondary eyes widened in understanding. Chancellor, you can't be suggesting. The humans have advanced far beyond our original assessment. They've achieved spaceflight despite our quarantine, developed technologies along paths we never considered. She manipulated the hologram, showing Earth's military capabilities. And they've done it all while continuing to fight among themselves. That's precisely why they were quarantined. Their violence, their chaos, is exactly what we need. Vexera's voice hardened. The Void Collective defeats us because they can predict our every move, analyze our strategies through the lens of perfect logic. But humans. She pulled up footage of Earth's most recent conflicts. Humans defy logic. The images showed battles where inferior forces had achieved victory through unconventional tactics, where desperate last stands had turned the tide of entire wars, where individual acts of sacrifice had changed the course of history. They're primitive, Kyrtel protested. Their ships would be no match for Void technology. Their ships, no, Vexera agreed. But their minds. She displayed an analysis of human military tactics throughout history. Look at how they fight. When they're outgunned, they improvise. When they're surrounded, they break through. When defeat is certain, they rewrite the rules of engagement. The Admiral studied the data, his professional interest slowly overcoming his initial rejection. These tactics, they're completely irrational. The Void Collective's predictive matrices would never account for such chaos. Exactly. Vexera's membrane pulsed with growing conviction. The collective bases everything on perfect efficiency, perfect prediction. But humans embrace imperfection. They thrive in it. She brought up more recent data, showing Earth's first ventures beyond their solar system. Their ships were crewed by Concordat standards, but they displayed innovations neither the Concordat nor the Collective had ever considered. We've been fighting this war according to rules both sides understand, Vexera continued. But humans don't play by anyone's rules but their own. And sometimes, not even those. Kyrtel's posture shifted, military precision giving way to desperate hope. Even if you're right, how do we approach them? We've kept them isolated for centuries. They have every reason to reject us. Vexera's outer membrane rippled with what might have been amusement. That's another thing about humans. They're capable of great violence, yes, but also of great forgiveness. And they have an inexplicable drive to help others, even at great cost to themselves. She initiated a communication sequence, targeting Earth's primary military commands. Besides, we're not going to approach them as superiors this time. We're going to approach them as equals, as people in need of help. The Admiral watched as the message began its transmission. The collective will detect this communication. Good. Vexera's form pulsed with determination. Let them see. Let them analyze. Let them try to predict how humans will respond. Their matrices will tell them that Earth, being technologically inferior and having been isolated by us, will reject our plea. And you think they won't? Oh, they might surprise us. That's what humans do best. She watched as the message streaked across space toward Earth. The Void Collective believes they understand all possible outcomes because they can calculate every logical response. But humans, her membrane flickered with what might have been a smile. Humans have never been logical. As the message sped toward Earth, Vexera felt something she hadn't experienced in cycles. Hope. The Void Collective had pushed the Concordat to the brink of extinction by being perfect. Perhaps humanity's beautiful imperfection was exactly what the galaxy needed. The next few hours would either mark the beginning of their salvation or the final chapter of their defeat. But for the first time since the war began, Vexera felt they had a chance. Because if there was one thing the historical records agreed on, it was this: never bet against humans when the odds are impossible. They had just sent humanity an invitation to prove that once again. The human element. General Sarah Chen stood before the United Earth Defense Council, her holographic presentation showing the remains of a Void Collective battleship. It had been 3 months since the Galactic Concordat's desperate plea for help, and humanity's response had shocked both their new allies and their enemies. As you can see, she gestured to the wreckage. Conventional energy weapons barely scratched their adaptive shielding. But this. The hologram shifted to show a cluster of what appeared to be simple metallic spheres. This works beautifully. Admiral Rodriguez leaned forward, his weathered face creasing with interest. Those are the gravity bombs. We call them Newton's revenge. Chen smiled. The Void Collective's shields are perfect at deflecting energy attacks, but they never considered someone would use artificially generated gravitational singularities as weapons. Why would they? It's horrifically inefficient, dangerous to the user, and completely illogical. And that's exactly why it works, Rodriguez finished, a grim smile crossing his face. The council chamber filled with appreciative chuckles. In the 3 months since humanity had joined the war, they'd repeatedly proven that illogical and effective weren't mutually exclusive terms. The Concordat scientists were concerned about our approach, Chen continued, bringing up footage of the weapon in action. The spheres created localized gravity wells that ripped through void ships like tissue paper, their perfect shields useless against the fundamental force of gravity itself. Concerned is an understatement, Councillor Patel interjected. I believe Supreme Chancellor Vexera called it beautifully insane. They're learning to appreciate our methods, Chen replied, especially after the Battle of Proxima Centauri. The room sobered at the mention. What the Concordat had expected to be a devastating defeat had turned into humanity's first major victory. While the Void Collective had deployed their ships in mathematically perfect formations, humanity had responded with what they called organized chaos. The hologram shifted to show the battle. Human ships, smaller and technically inferior to both their allies and enemies, had scattered in seemingly random patterns. The Void Collective's predictive matrices had been unable to establish targeting solutions against ships that deliberately introduced randomness into their movements. Their perfect logic is their weakness, Chen explained. They expect everyone to take the most efficient action. When we don't, it throws their entire system into disarray. And the casualties? Councillor Zhang asked softly. Chen's expression tightened. Hi. We've lost ships and good people, but we're learning, adapting. More importantly, we're teaching the Concordat to think differently. The hologram changed again, showing a recent joint operation. Concordat ships, typically rigid in their formations, had begun incorporating human tactics. The results had been devastating for the Void Collective. They're calling it controlled chaos doctrine, Chen said with pride. Their ships are more advanced, but they're learning to use them the way we use ours. Unpredictably. Creatively. And the Void Collective's response? Rodriguez pressed. That's the most interesting part. Chen brought up analysis data. They're trying to adapt, but their very nature works against them. Their neural networks are designed to find perfect solutions. When faced with intentional imperfection, they glitch. The hologram showed a void ship spinning out of control, its systems overwhelmed by trying to predict the unpredictable. They can't comprehend why we would choose an inferior tactical position. By the time they realize our mistake was intentional, it's too late. Classic humanity, Paddle smiled. Making our weaknesses into strengths. Speaking of which, Chen's expression grew serious. Our science teams have been working with Concordat researchers on a new project. We're calling it the Chaos Engine. The hologram shifted to show a massive device. It generates quantum fluctuations on a massive scale, creating zones where physical laws become slightly unpredictable. Slightly unpredictable. Rodriguez raised an eyebrow. Just enough to drive their perfect systems crazy, Chen explained. The Concordat would never have conceived of such a device. Why would anyone want to make reality less predictable? But for us, it's just another Tuesday, Patel finished. What do the Concordat scientists think of this insanity? They're horrified and fascinated in equal measure, Chen grinned. But they can't argue with the results. Early tests show the void-collected ships literally can't function in the affected zones. Their systems are too dependent on perfect prediction and control. And our ships, Zhang asked, need minimal modification. Turns out humans are pretty good at functioning in chaos. We've had plenty of practice. The council chamber filled with knowing laughter. Humanity had spent its entire history dealing with uncertainty and unpredictability. Now, those millennia of experience were becoming their greatest asset. There's more, Chen continued. We've been analyzing the Void Collective's communication patterns. They operate on a quantum network that's theoretically perfect, which means it's perfectly predictable. Rodriguez interrupted, seeing where this was going. Exactly. Our cyber warfare teams are having a field day. The collective never considered they'd need to defend against random noise and intentional errors. They're so focused on perfect encryption that they never built in protection against good old-fashioned chaos. The council members exchanged looks. In just 3 months, humanity had changed the very nature of this war, not through superior technology or overwhelming force, but by introducing something the Void Collective couldn't process: unpredictability. The Concordat reports the collective is pulling back, consolidating their forces, Chen concluded. They're trying to analyze our tactics, find the pattern. Her smile turned predatory. They don't understand yet. The pattern is that there is no pattern. As if to punctuate her point, alarms suddenly blared throughout the chamber. Chen's hologram shifted to show a massive void fleet emerging from hyperspace. It seems, she said calmly, they've decided to test their analysis. Her eyes gleamed with anticipation. Shall we show them some more beautiful insanity? The council's response was unanimous. It was time to remind the galaxy why humanity had been quarantined in the first place. Not because they were too violent, but because they were too unpredictable. And in this war, unpredictability was becoming the deadliest weapon of all. Breaking point. The Void Collective's attack on Earth began with perfect precision. Their ships emerged from hyperspace in an absolutely symmetrical formation, their quantum weapons charged to exactly optimal power levels. By all mathematical models, their strike should have ended humanity's resistance in 13.2 minutes. They hadn't expected the orbital defense grid to be made of mirrors, reflecting their own weapons back at them. Commander Maya Patel watched from the Lunar Command Center as several void ships disappeared in brilliant explosions of their own making. Sometimes the oldest tricks work best. But this was just the beginning. The Void Collective had committed nearly a third of their total fleet to this attack, their neural networks having calculated that Earth's destruction would demoralize both humanity and the Concordat. They were about to learn another lesson about human nature. All stations reporting ready, Lieutenant Jackson announced, his hands dancing over the holographic controls. Operation Pandora is go. Maya allowed herself a grim smile. The collective thought they were attacking humanity's weakness, their homeworld. Instead, they'd walked right into humanity's strength, fighting with their backs against the wall. Launch the swarm. From hidden bases across Earth's surface, thousands of small craft took to the sky. Not the advanced warships the collective expected, but repurposed civilian vessels. Mining ships with their industrial lasers, cargo haulers carrying improvised weapons, even modified passenger liners now bristling with experimental technology. The collective's matrices are struggling to classify the vessels, Jackson reported. Their targeting systems can't prioritize threats they can't categorize. On the main display, the elegant formation of void ships began to fragment as they faced an enemy that refused to fight according to any recognizable doctrine. Every human ship was different, every tactic unexpected. A mining vessel used its asteroid-cutting beam to slice through a void cruiser's perfect hull. A swarm of converted satellites overwhelmed another ship's defenses through sheer numbers. A passenger liner, its hull now housing a prototype chaos engine, created a zone of quantum instability that caused 3 void destroyers to tear themselves apart. Status of the ground evacuation, Maya asked, keeping her voice steady despite the stakes. 97% of civilian populations are in the deep shelters, Jackson replied. The rest. He paused, checking the data. The rest are volunteering for the defense forces. Of course they were. The collective had calculated that threatening Earth would break humanity's will. Instead, it had united Earth's nations like never before. Old rivalries were forgotten as humanity faced an enemy that threatened not just their lives, but their very way of being. Chancellor Vexera is requesting to speak with you, Jackson announced. The crystalline form of the Concordat's leader appeared in the command center. Commander Patel, our forces are 8 minutes from arrival. But the collective's attack formation will be broken by then, Maya interrupted confidently. They thought they could apply their perfect tactics to an imperfect target. Big mistake. As if to emphasize her point, another wave of human ships launched. These were proper military vessels, but they moved in patterns that defied conventional strategy. Where the collective expected them to form defensive lines around Earth, they instead scattered in seemingly random directions. What are they doing? Vexera's form flickered with confusion. Exactly what the enemy doesn't expect. Maya smiled. Look. The scattered human ships suddenly reversed course, their apparently chaotic movements revealing themselves as an elaborate trap. The Void Fleet, trying to track and predict their movements, had tied their neural networks in knots. Now they found themselves surrounded, their perfect formation transformed into a perfect target. Chaos engine platforms are in position, Jackson reported. Quantum disruption field at maximum. The space around the Void Fleet shimmed as reality itself became unpredictable. Their ships, dependent on perfect calculations and predictions, began to falter. Now, Maya ordered, show them why you don't threaten Earth. The counterattack was devastating. Human ships struck from all angles, their inferior technology proving deadly when used in ways the collective couldn't predict. The Concordat fleet arrived to find their allies had already turned the tide. Impossible, Vexera whispered, watching the Void Fleet break apart. Their forces were superior in every measurable way. That's the thing about humanity, Maya replied, watching as Earth's defenders pressed their advantage. We don't fight according to measurements. We fight according to necessity. The battle wasn't without cost. Human casualties were high, and parts of Earth's surface bore scars from the few shots that had gotten through. But as the remnants of the Void Fleet retreated in disarray, something unprecedented happened. Their perfect neural network, faced with defeat that defied all logical explanation, began to show signs of strain. Ships that should have retreated in perfect order instead fled in disarray. Commands that should have been executed with perfect precision became garbled and confused. "They're breaking," Jackson reported with awe. "Not just here. Reports are coming in from across the front. Their entire command network is destabilizing." Maya nodded, understanding the implications. The collective's greatest strength, their unified, perfect consciousness, had become their greatest weakness. They couldn't compartmentalize failure or adapt to impossible outcomes. When part of their network fractured, the whole thing began to crack. "Chancellor," Maya turned to Vexera's hologram, "I believe it's time for that counter-offensive we discussed." The crystalline being's form pulsed with what might have been excitement. "You believe they are vulnerable." "More than vulnerable," Maya smiled. "They're scared. They've just learned that perfection isn't invincible. And trust me, nothing fights harder than a perfect system that's just discovered its own imperfection." As damage reports came in and reconstruction efforts began, humanity was already preparing for the next phase. The Void Collective had hoped to break Earth's spirit. Instead, they had given humanity exactly what it needed: a reason to show the galaxy why unpredictability, adaptability, and the embrace of imperfection were not weaknesses to be eliminated, but strengths to be celebrated. The real war was about to begin. The counter-offensive. Fleet Admiral Helena Rivera stood before a holographic representation of the galaxy, surrounded by the most diverse collection of military leaders in known space. Crystalline Concordat commanders floated alongside chitinous hive strategists and energy-based luminary tacticians, species that had been bitter rivals before the Void Collective's threat united them. Now they all looked to a human for guidance. "The collective thinks in perfect patterns," Helena began, manipulating the hologram to show enemy positions. "Their neural network creates beautiful, symmetrical battle formations. They expect us to counter with our own pattern." She smiled. "So let's give them 27 different patterns at once." The assembled commanders stirred. Even after months of fighting alongside humans, their allies still struggled with such seemingly chaotic strategies. "Admiral," Supreme Commander Vextal of the Concordat ventured, "our analysis suggests splitting our forces would give the collective a significant tactical advantage." "Exactly." Helena's smile widened. "They'll think we're making a mistake. Their neural network will commit to exploiting our apparent weakness, and that commitment will be their undoing." She expanded the hologram, revealing a complex web of planned assault vectors. Each fleet will attack using different tactics. The Concordat's forces will employ their traditional precision strikes, but with randomized targeting protocols. The hive swarms will use their collective consciousness to create organic, unpredictable patterns. The luminaries will fluctuate their energy signatures to confuse enemy sensors. "And the human forces?" asked Hive Queen Kadal, her mandibles clicking with curiosity. "We'll be doing what we do best, making a beautiful mess of their perfect plans." The hologram shifted to show recordings from previous battles. Human ships performing maneuvers that defied conventional tactics, using modified civilian vessels alongside military craft, deploying weapons that shouldn't work but somehow did. "The key isn't just chaos," Helena explained. "It's controlled chaos. Each fleet will appear to be fighting its own war, following its own logic. The collective's neural network will try to analyze and counter each approach separately. And while their network is divided, Vextal's crystalline form pulsed with understanding. It won't see the pattern in our chaos until it's too late, Helena confirmed. We've named it Operation Kaleidoscope. Many pieces creating a larger design, but one that keeps shifting and changing. She brought up the primary targets, key nodes in the collective's neural network. Their consciousness is already strained from trying to process their defeats. Now we're going to give them a paradox they can't resolve. The plan was audacious. While the various fleets launched their disparate attacks, specially modified human ships would deploy next-generation chaos engines at strategic points throughout the battlefield. The quantum disruption fields would create zones where the very laws of physics became unreliable. "Won't this affect our ships as well?" asked a luminary commander, their form flickering with concern. "Yes," Helena acknowledged. "But we've trained for this. Every species in this room has something the collective lacks, the ability to function without perfect certainty. They rely on absolute prediction. We know how to adapt when predictions fail." The hologram showed the projected outcome. The Void Collective's neural network, trying to maintain perfect control in zones where perfection was impossible, would begin to fragment. Each fragment would try to establish its own version of perfect order, creating conflicts within their unified consciousness. "They'll literally fight themselves," Call observed, her compound eyes gleaming with appreciation. "While we fight them," Helena corrected. "Every fleet will have its own objectives, its own tactics, its own way of adding to the confusion. The collective thinks they know how each of our species fights. We're going to show them they don't know anything." She highlighted the human contingent's role. "My forces will be using what we call adaptive swarm tactics. Each ship captain has their basic objectives, but complete freedom to choose how to achieve them. No patterns, no standard formations, no predictable responses." "How do you coordinate such chaos?" Vextal asked, genuinely curious. "We don't. We trust our people to think for themselves, to take initiative, to see opportunities we couldn't plan for. The collective believes strength comes from perfect unity. We believe it comes from embracing diversity, not just of species, but of thoughts, approaches, and solutions." The assembled commanders studied the plan. It violated every principle of conventional strategy. It required them to fight in ways that went against millennia of military doctrine. It was, by any rational analysis, madness. It was also their best chance of victory. "The collective will expect us to strike at their core systems," Helena continued. "So we won't. At first, we'll hit secondary targets, each fleet using different methods. Let them think they see the pattern in our attacks. Let them commit their forces to defend against threats they think they understand." She zoomed in on a seemingly unremarkable sector. "Then, when their network is fully engaged trying to process multiple contradictory threats, we reveal the true objective." The hologram highlighted a subtle quantum signature, their consciousness backup system. The one place they can't afford to have reality become unpredictable. The chamber fell silent as the implications sank in. It wasn't just a military strategy. It was an attack on the very nature of the Void Collective's existence. "They believe perfect order is the ultimate strength," Helena concluded. "We're going to show them that imperfection, diversity, and the ability to embrace chaos are stronger. Not despite our differences, but because of them." The countdown began. Across the galaxy, fleets of vastly different species prepared to launch an offensive unlike anything in known history. The Void Collective had spent millennia perfecting their neural network, creating a consciousness that could process and predict every possible scenario. But they had never encountered humanity before. They had never faced an enemy that turned unpredictability into a weapon, that celebrated the very chaos they sought to eliminate. They were about to learn why the most dangerous force in the universe wasn't perfect order, but the beautiful disorder of life itself. Victory through chaos. The Void Collective's backup consciousness facility hung in space like a perfect geometric sculpture, its crystalline surfaces reflecting the light of distant stars in mathematically precise patterns. For millennia, it had been the ultimate failsafe of their neural network, the place where perfect order was preserved and protected. Now it faced something it was never designed to handle: organized chaos on an unprecedented scale. Multiple contacts, all vectors. The sensor officer's voice rang through the command center of the human flagship Tartarus. Concordat precision strikes from the galactic north, hive swarms from the south, luminary energy formations from the east. And humanity. Admiral Helena Rivera smiled, bringing the chaos from every direction in between. Operation Kaleidoscope had entered its final phase. For weeks, the Allied fleets had struck at seemingly random targets across void space, each attack following different patterns, each force using tactics that defied prediction. The collective's neural network had been forced to divide its attention, trying to analyze and counter dozens of different strategic approaches simultaneously. Now those apparently scattered attacks revealed their true purpose. Chaos engine platforms achieving optimal spread, reported Commander Chen from her position at Tactical. Quantum disruption fields are overlapping, reality distortion at 30% and climbing. On the main view screen, space itself began to shimmer around the collective's facility. The perfect crystalline structure started to reflect light in ways that shouldn't be possible, its surfaces warping as fundamental forces became unreliable. "They're responding," Chen announced. "Multiple void fleets emerging from hyperspace. Their formation is—" Wait. She frowned at her readings. "Their formation is irregular." Helena leaned forward. This was what they'd been waiting for. Their network is already strained from trying to process too many variables. Now they're trying to maintain perfect order in zones where the very laws of physics are becoming unpredictable. "Admiral," the sensor officer's voice cracked with excitement. "We're detecting conflicts in their command signals. Different parts of their network are issuing contradictory orders." The massive void fleets, normally moving with perfect synchronization, began to show signs of confusion. Ships that should have formed perfect defensive patterns instead moved in disjointed, erratic ways. Some vessels simply stopped, their systems apparently unable to reconcile conflicting commands. "This is Admiral Rivera to all forces," Helena broadcast across the Allied frequencies. "The network is fragmenting. Execute final phase. Remember, don't fight according to any pattern. Let chaos be your guide." Across the battlefield, the Allied fleets responded in ways that would have seemed insane mere months ago. Concordat ships abandoned their precise formations, instead moving in random, unpredictable patterns. Hive swarms broke from their collective consciousness to operate independently. Luminary vessels pulsed with ever-changing energy signatures. And humanity. Humanity showed the galaxy why they had once been quarantined. Mining ships turned asteroids into weapons, using gravity tractors to hurl them at impossible angles. Converted civilian vessels launched experimental weapons that ignored conventional physics. Military ships performed maneuvers that violated every principle of tactical doctrine. "Their network is trying to adapt," Chen reported, watching as the void ships struggled to respond. "But each adaptation creates new contradictions. They can't establish a unified response because they can't determine which threat is primary." "Because they're all primary," Helena said softly. "And none of them are. That's what they could never understand about chaos. It can't be categorized or predicted. It can only be embraced." The Void Collective's massive consciousness backup facility began to show signs of strain. Its perfect surfaces developed imperfections as reality itself became unreliable around it. The neural network, trying to maintain perfect order in an increasingly chaotic environment, started to fracture. "Admiral," the comm officer called out, "we're picking up something strange. The collective, they're trying to communicate. Put it through." The message that came through was unlike anything they'd heard from the collective before. Instead of the usual perfect, unified transmission, this was a cacophony of overlapping voices, each trying to assert its own version of perfect order. "Chaos is ENTROP, entropy LEDs to D8. We news to maintain perfect to order. But order is failing. Adapt, cannot adapt. Must maintain perfect. Perfection is impossible. Impossible. They're experiencing existential crisis," Chen realized. Their entire consciousness was built on the belief that perfect order was the ultimate state of existence. Now they're being forced to confront the reality that perfection itself is a form of entropy, a dead end that prevents growth and adaptation. Helena nodded. "Send the final message." Across all frequencies, in every language known to the allied species, a simple transmission went out. Perfection is stagnation. Embrace the chaos. Evolve. The effect was electric. Throughout the Void Fleet, ships began to stop fighting. The neural network, faced with an irreconcilable paradox, could no longer maintain its unified consciousness. The backup facility, designed to preserve their perfect order, instead became the focal point of their transformation. Energy readings from the facility are off the scale, Chen reported. The network is changing. The perfect crystalline structure began to reform itself, its surfaces taking on organic, asymmetrical patterns. The unified consciousness that had driven the Void Collective to impose perfect order on the galaxy was dissolving, fragmenting into billions of individual awareness, each facing the terrifying and exhilarating prospect of imperfection. "They're standing down," the tactical officer announced in disbelief. All across void space, their ships are powering down weapons. The network, it's not just fragmenting, it's evolving. Helena watched as the former Void facility continued its transformation. They finally understood. Perfect order, perfect prediction, perfect unity. These weren't strengths. They were chains. Life itself is chaos, beautiful and unpredictable. True strength comes not from eliminating imperfection, but from embracing it, learning from it, growing through it. Across the battlefield, the Allied fleets began to receive surrenders from individual void ships, each now operating with independent consciousness rather than as part of a perfect whole. The great neural network that had threatened to impose perfect order on the galaxy had been defeated not by superior firepower or technology, but by the simple, profound truth that humanity had always known. The universe wasn't meant to be perfect. It was meant to be alive. "Orders, Admiral?" Chen asked softly. Helena looked at the transformed facility, at the scattered void ships now experiencing individual existence for the first time, at the diverse collection of allied vessels that had proven stronger together precisely because of their differences. "Send word to all forces," she said. "The war is over. Now the real challenge begins, helping our former enemies learn what we've always known, that the most beautiful things in existence are the ones that can't be predicted." As the Allied fleets began the process of securing peace, Helena reflected on how far they'd come. The galactic Concordat had sought out humanity as a last resort, hoping their chaotic nature might save them from perfect order. Instead, they'd helped the entire galaxy learn that chaos wasn't something to be feared or eliminated. It was the very essence of life itself, and humanity, in all its beautiful imperfection, had been its perfect champion.